Hey everyone, and welcome back to our ice cream beginner tutorial series for Blender 2.8. Hope you guys are having fun and enjoying the series thus far. Here is a result to this point, and this is going to be the last part where we really clean up this mesh just a little bit more with some added lighting effects and add in sort of a flooring to our scene here as well. It's going to be a lot of fun, so I hope you guys are excited to finish this up now, and let's go ahead and do just that. So for starters, I'm going to go to our Eevee settings here. By clicking on our Eevee settings right there, I'm going to scroll down and under Film, I'm going to choose Transparent, just so it hides that background screen, just so we have our cone here in our viewport. And then I'm going to place my camera. So zooming out a little bit, right about here, looks like a nice angle. I'm going to select the camera, and then I'm going to go Alt-Control-0, and that's going to snap the camera right to my view, which is nice for placing the camera in the general area that you're looking for. And now I can hit G and middle mouse wheel while I'm in the camera viewport here and zoom in and out. If you're not sure how to get into the camera viewport, it's just 0 on your number pad. And so you can go ahead and G, middle mouse button, pull it out, and then G and Z, I'm gonna lift the camera up a bit higher, and then double tap R to rotate it down. Something like that. So we have a nice cone in our scene right there, and we have the materials looking nice there. So I'm going to start off by grabbing those sprinkles, so just moving them out of our camera viewport so we don't see them. And then I'm going to go Shift S to snap that cursor to the center of our scene, which is the world origin. So just grab the world origin in the pie menu there. And now we're going to add in our last object for our scene, and that's going to be a plane. So go Shift A to bring up the add menu, and then choose plane. Now I'm going to go ahead and scale this up so it's a nice flat table, and then hit G and Z to pull it down until it reaches the bottom of our cone there. So right about there is exactly where we want it placed. As you can see, the shadow will let you know when you're there. Now we're going to give this a basic quick material, and this is going to be a marble texture. So I'm just splitting my window here again like we were in the last tutorial part to add in some materials, grabbing the shader editor over here. And now this texture is a PBR texture from ccotextures.com. So here you can see I have the website up. This is an awesome free website for gathering textures. You have all kinds of textures to work with, and you're just going to want to download the marble texture. I'll link to it in the description below. Now, a PBR texture is a physically based rendering texture, which is going to give you some real world results when you plug in all the different textures to your principled shader. And so instead of talking about it, let me just show you. So we're going to go New on our plane to add in a new material. And I'm going to go Shift A and open up our first image texture. So I'm going to go Texture, Image Texture. Now I'm just going to open up that PBR texture I was talking about here. This is the marble texture. You're going to want to start off by just opening the color texture there. I'm going to go ahead and plug this right into the color of our principled shader. And you can see our marble texture now is being added to the floor of our plane. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to duplicate this texture by grabbing it and hitting Shift D. And then we're going to click that little folder icon and open up the roughness texture. Now the only difference is on these, I'm going to change the color space from sRGB to non-color. Because these aren't affecting the color of the texture, anything that's not affecting the color, you want to set to non-color. And then you can just connect this to the roughness of that marble texture. And you can see immediately we start getting a reflection in that marble texture, which looks really cool. And yeah, it's making it look nice and realistic. And so we can go ahead and duplicate that one more time. Grab a new texture. This time we're going to grab the normal. So go ahead and grab the normal texture. Set it to non-color data again. Then you're going to go Shift A to bring up the add menu and add in a vector normal map node. This is going to be plugged into the color of our normal map node right there. And then we're going to choose the UV map there on our marble material. And this will be plugged right in to the normal output. And this is kind of how you set up a basic PBR material within Blender 2.8. There's one more texture, or actually two more textures that we want to add now. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this normal right here. I'm going to open up the height right here. That's actually called displacement. Open up the displacement here, change it to non-color data, and we're going to add in one more node. This is the vector bump node. I'm going to drop it right into the normal setting here. And this is just going to affect the height of our bump node. So drop it right into the height there. And you can see this is way too strong again. So we're just going to take the strength way down to about a 0.1. So that gives us a nice realistic marble material. If it's a little bit too bright for your liking though, like it is for me, I'm going to go ahead and darken our color texture just a little bit by going Shift A and adding in a color RGB curves. Drop it right in here, and this will allow you to kind of tweak the color of that texture. So right now we have it set to color, and I'm just going to grab that handle and pull it down a bit to give ourselves a nice darker looking marble texture, something like that. I think looks nice. And yeah, that's all you have to do. You're just darkening the color up a bit. And I might also take the strength down even more, maybe a 0.05 on that height map there. And that's looking very nice. But there is another step left to finishing off this scene, and that is baking the indirect lighting. So right now the environment map isn't adding any shadows or anything to our scene because that doesn't happen until you bake the lighting from it. So we are done with the material cell, so I can close this off by grabbing the corner and pulling it over. We're going to add in an object that's used for Eevee rendering, and that's going to be called, if you go Shift A, it's going to be called a light probe irradiance volume. Go ahead and drop that right in. And this is basically a cube that everything inside of it will have its indirect lighting baked into the scene, which will give you results very close to something like Cycles, which does it automatically, but takes a long time to process it. This allows us to bake it so we can view our object then in different angles and stuff in real time. So I'm just scaling this up and placing it directly over our cube, kind of moving around to make sure it's staying right in the center of our cube there. And then I'm just going to go over to our indirect lighting settings here in Eevee. We'll save our scene real quick. And then I'm going to choose Bake Indirect Lighting. So you choose that. It's going to take a second when it bakes down here, you can see. And after that is finished, we will have our indirect lighting baked into our scene. So there you have it. And now we have some much more realistic looking lighting baked into our scene. If I show you what it looks like here, you can see that we have the lighting baked everywhere that the cube map is, and it's much darker where that shadow has been baked onto our floor plane here. And it also bakes the lighting onto things like the mesh here as well, which is giving us a much more realistic looking lighting to our scene. So I want to kind of tweak our scene just a little bit here now before we do our final render. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab our ice cream here. And I said that we were done texturing, but I lied. I'm going to quick split our window here and open up our shader editor one more time. And what I want to do is I actually want to have the white cream on this side and the black cream on that side. So to do this, all I have to do is flip these inputs. So I'm just going to pull that over, and now you can see that we have the white ice cream on the one side and the black ice cream on the other side. I'm just going to tighten this up a bit, right around there. Maybe adjust our cream color there just a little bit as well. I think it just looks a little bit better to have the black on the right side. So this is up to personal preference, but you can tweak it if you like it better or not. So that's good for the ice cream now. I'm gonna go ahead and close this off. Now I wanna change the colors of our scene a little bit. So right now they're a little bit flat looking, you might notice. And so if you scroll down here to the color management and bring that open, you can see we have it set to filmic, and we just have a default non-look. If I change this look though to something like a high contrast, this gives us much more darks and blacks in our scene, which just looks a little bit nicer for an ice cream cone render. So I'm gonna go ahead and change that to high contrast, and then I'm gonna increase the exposure just to kind of brighten up our scene a little bit there. Something like a 0.5 on the exposure is going to be good. You can see that this just makes our ice cream cone look a lot sharper. And there we have our cone. So another thing we can do to add a little bit of realism to this scene is add a little bit of depth of field. So depth of field is something that you get from a camera. A lot of you probably know what it is, where things in the background become a little bit blurry and things in the foreground become a little bit blurry, and the subject just becomes nice and sharp. So what I'm going to do is we can do that in Eevee by grabbing our camera and clicking depth of field right there. I'm also going to go down to viewport display and enable limits. This will allow us to see what is in focus, where this plus sign here, this yellow plus is. Anything in that range will be in focus. So I can go ahead and adjust the depth of field now by dropping that down and changing the focus distance here. I'm just going to change the focus distance to be right in front of the ice cream cone there. So right about there is where I want it to be focused. And now I'm just going to turn the f-stop down a bit. And if I jump to camera view, you'll be able to see the focus start to change in our scene as I drop this down. And you can see this gives us a nice blurry background. So I'm going to leave it at about a 0.2, and this just gives you a nice sort of shallow depth of field on your ice cream cone. So now that you might be getting pretty happy with your render, we can just work on adjusting the final settings to give ourselves a little bit of a higher quality render. So to start, I'm going to click the option here, which will turn off all the overlays so we can just see our render and nothing else in the scene. This makes it nice and easy to adjust settings on the go. And the one thing I might want to adjust is the bump now on the ice cream. It looks like it could be a little bit stronger. So I'm just going to select that, split our window here to open up our shader editor right there. And now hit N to close off the Properties tab. And now I'm just going to increase the strength of that bump node a little bit on our ice cream cone to add just a little bit more of that bump mapping back to it. That's looking very nice. And you can see we have some sprinkles on the very tip here. I don't think that looks very realistic. So jumping back to solid view here, I'm just scrolling along our settings up there. I'll go to weight paint and with our circle selected, of course. And I'm just going to grab that subtract brush there as well and make sure that there's no sprinkles being applied to the top little peak here. Something like that looks a little bit better. And that's looking pretty nice. And now the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the shadow quality and the indirect lighting quality. So to do this, I'm just going to jump to our Eevee settings right here. And I'm going to choose the cube size for the shadows to be 1024. That's just going to give us a little bit higher quality shadows. And then I'm going to select our indirect lighting box here. That's what I'm calling it. It's the irradiance volume technically, but okay. And then I'm going to jump to the context here. And I'm going to shift, click, and drag all three of these values along the X, Y, and Z. And I'm going to increase this to about 6. And then I can go back to our Eevee settings here. Scroll down and bake the indirect lighting again. This is going to take just a little bit longer this time, but will give us a higher resolution indirect lighting bake. So the indirect lighting finished baking there, and now you can see we're left with a very nice, clean looking result here. If I turn off the overlays again, close our window up here. So there we're left with a very nice looking ice cream cone. And yeah, it's looking really nice. The last thing to do is we can add a little bit of final compositing effects to this to give ourselves a nice finished render that you can share then to Instagram or Twitter or wherever. So to do this, I'm going to start off by hitting F12, which will give you a basic render. And so here you can see we have a very nice looking render, and it rendered extremely fast in just less than 2 seconds using Eevee. So that's really incredible. And we can now do our final compositing techniques to this, just to give ourselves a little bit more of a finished result. Now the one thing I'm noticing is our sprinkles look a little bit too shiny. If you see what some of these sprinkles look like, they're a little bit too shiny for my, my liking. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quick turn down the specularity a little bit on those right here, just grabbing the sprinkle material and turning down the specularity a bit there. You can see that this kind of reduces the amount of shine on them. I'm also increasing the roughness just a little bit on them, something like that. And then if I hit F12, we'll get a new render in 2 seconds. That looks just a little bit better, I think. Okay, so now we're going to do some compositing on this. So I can close off that render there. We'll save our project by going Control S. And then I'm going to jump to our compositing tab right here. If I choose use nodes, you'll see we have a node there with our ice cream cone. I'm going to hit N to close off our properties tab there as I don't need it. And I'll spread these out a bit so we have a little bit of room to work with. So for starters, I'm going to go Shift A and add in a color alpha over node. By dropping it right in the bottom socket and then going Control Shift and clicking on our alpha over node there, we'll get a viewer node added in here and we'll see our render in the background. And you can see that this gives us the basic white color in the background. But I don't want a completely white color as that's kind of washing out our ice cream cone a bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go Shift A, add in a new input and make this an RGB node. For this color, I'm going to choose something a little bit more of a blue-gray, similar to what the ground is here. Just sort of a nice blue-gray there, and connect this to the color right there. And you can see that then we can kind of tweak this to kind of get whatever sort of color in the background we're looking for. You can go purple if you wanted to. You can go blue. I'm going to just kind of go with a neutral sort of blue color here. Also, you can see that the seam here looks very harsh between our color and our background. You just want to choose Convert Pre-Multiply, and that makes that nice and smooth. And now what we're going to do is we're going to add a vignette in the Blender Compositor. This is really easy to do. All we're going to have to do is use an Eclipse mask. So we're just going to go Shift-A to bring up the Add menu, go down to Matte, and add in a basic Eclipse mask. Dropping it in right here, all we're going to do is increase the scale to be about the same size as our render there. So holding Shift so we don't go too far, I'm just moving the width value here until the white box fills our scene approximately there. And then the same thing with the height, pulling it until it fits the top of the frame there. Now if I Control Shift click it, you can see we have a nice circular vignette shape. And all we have to do is blur this and add it to our final image. So I'm going to go Shift A and add in a filter blur node. I'm going to drop that right in there by letting go of it right on the line there. Changing it to Fast Gaussian, we'll choose Relative, and then I'm going to blur it with a value of 30 along the X and a value of 30, or maybe we'll go 20 along the Y. So with that, you can see we have a nice vignette, and all we have to do is multiply it over the top of our finished result there. So to do this, we're just going to go Shift A, add in a Mix node, drop it right in there, change it from Mix to Multiply, and then drop the blur value in the bottom socket. And if I Control Shift click our Multiply node there, you can see we have a nice strong vignette around the outside of our cone. You can turn this down a little bit now using the Multiply node there, but it's looking very nice, and it kind of adds your attention drawn right to the center cone. Now the one other thing we can do is using the same sort of Eclipse mask and blur is we can add a little bit of a highlight to our render. If you're wondering how I'm zooming in and out, that's V and Alt V on your keyboard to zoom in and out in the compositor here. But what we can do, and I'm just using the middle mouse wheel then to move around, and then if you hold Alt and use the middle mouse wheel, you can move the viewport around there as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of a highlight right over our ice cream cone by using these same two nodes. So I'm going to grab both these nodes, we'll just pull them over here a bit, and then I can Shift D, duplicate them, and I'm just going to use this same Eclipse mask but make it much smaller now. So holding Shift and scrolling my mouse across the scene, I'm going to make a nice sort of smaller shape right over our ice cream cone there, something like that. And now I'm going to turn the amount of blur down. We'll go down to about a 12 on the X and Y for this node. And I'll just give myself a little bit more room to work with here by pulling these nodes out. And I'm going to take this color, add in a new color, mix node, drop it right in there, change it to add right there. And then I'm going to connect the blurred value from our Eclipse mask into the bottom socket. And you can see that this just adds a nice sort of highlight to our scene here. If I turn this off, you can see it's kind of boring and plain. If I turn it on, you can see we have that nice blurred highlight. And if you want to shift click both these values and make it a little bit bigger, you could extend that blurred value out even more or less. I like just a bit of it there, and then I'm going to turn the amount down a bit here, just to give you sort of that contrasty variation to your final render there. I think that looks pretty good though. The one thing I'm noticing on our finished waffle cone here is that it seems like the waffle cone pattern could be a little bit bigger, and maybe the bump could be turned down a little bit as well. So I'm just going to jump back to our rendered settings here, grab that cone, and let's split our window to open up the shader editor right here. And to close off the properties tab, I'm just going to turn down the strength a little bit more by going about a 0.18. And I'm going to make this cone size even bigger by making this more of like a 0.8 right there. So 0.08, turning the strength down to a 0.18, and we'll have to change both of these materials here to be 0.18 to make a match. And there you have it. That just looks a little bit better, I think. So there is our finished result, guys. If you hit F12 to get the updated render there, you can see it in its final glory. But that's going to do it, guys. That is our finished result in Blender 2.8, creating a nice ice cream cone that it looks very delicious, and we created some of our own textures. We created all of the particles and this unique sort of modeling shape, and it was a lot of fun. So I hope you guys have had some fun as well along the way, creating some tasty looking ice cream cones. If you did, feel free to share them with me. There's links to my Twitter and Instagram page in the description below, so you guys can go ahead and post them to Twitter and Instagram. Tag me so I can see them, because I love to see you guys' finished results, but that's going to do it. Here's my finished results after a little bit of tweaking. And yeah, it was a lot of fun, a really good project, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. Hope you guys did as well. I will see you all in a future Blender tutorial, so get subscribed to get notified when the next tutorial drops, and I'll see you guys all then. Bye-bye!